It's the one big piece of advice that you either didn't hear or you would want to hear again, or just the thing that was the most important. What would you say or hear at that
I think
time?
want to hear again. That's probably the way that I would describe that, because I know you said that to me. You said if you can make it work, try to make it work, because the grass is not always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
It's going to be extremely difficult for you and your children. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is separating from someone is your decision to make and yours only. So that is the advice that I would give, the advice that I would give, the feedback that I would give to anyone who is contemplating, a divorce or separating. Only you know what's going on in your home, in your heart, in your mind, and in your relationship. Nobody else can tell you to stay or go. And, I remember when I talked to my family about maybe wanting to divorce, because I come from a very traditional family. I am Latina. That's, one thing to mention. I am, Hispanic, and
traditions are a big thing in your culture, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I'm first generation Mexican American. So, divorce in my family doesn't exist, my cousins, family, aunts, uncles, and anybody that you can think of, in my family that I have a relationship with, they're still married. So everyone was encouraging me not to do it. They said, you shouldn't do it. Don't do it. He's a good man. He's a good person. He treats you well. You've got children. At the end of the day, they didn't know what was happening with my mind, my heart, even my body.
Behind closed doors, basically.
Right, behind closed doors. So it is your decision to make. I obviously do encourage anyone that's in that situation to, reach out to a friend or a family member, a counselor,
church, retreat. Yeah. If I recall, you guys worked on it with doing some retreats and trying to go on some vacations, some counseling and things.
We did, yeah. We did some counseling, and then, I agreed to go on a retreat. I'm not a very religious person, but he is. He's Catholic, and so I agreed to go on a retreat. So at the end of the day, against everyone's advice, I did what was in my heart. And to this day, I feel like that was the right decision for me and for him, because he is a good man, and he does deserve someone that's going to love him, respect him, and basically give him all that he deserves.
Right. This is obviously a podcast for single moms by single moms. It's not in any way to stereotype a single mom or make it seem that it's always the women that have to leave the men because the men are jerks or what have you. I'm going to throw this out. There's a lot of typicals out there in terms of men cheating on their wives, or something like that. And it might not have to have any cheating, but, I know with you felt like more you wanted to leave the relationship because he didn't deserve you. It's your you knew that you weren't giving him what he deserved, which is a big decision for you to still have to sit on. And you made that choice, that it's even better for your children's sake that they don't raise up in a relationship like that, to have that. I'm just reflecting because it's true. A lot of us take into account the reasons when we leave. And the biggest one is, I don't want my kids to watch this example growing up. Whether it's we fight all the time and they see violence, or they see a loveless marriage, or what have you. I agree that fast forward 6 years later, it's like my story is very different to yours. There was a lot of tragic abuse, not physical abuse, but addiction related abuse, so that it was just very ugly for us. And it was a very standardized, there was no other option for me but to exit the relationship for the safety of all of our sakes. However, we've never had a better relationship now. My ex and I were great friends, great co-parents, and I know that's the same for you and your ex too. And so it's fast forward 5 years for you, 6 for me. The outcome has been that we've both got what we wanted, which is our children get to see us in a loving relationship. We don't live under the same roof, but we give them what we feel the kids deserve, which is not either a loveless marriage, or for me, a tragic, abusive one. So it's interesting that, you're right. From the outsider's point of view, people looking in, it's all perfect, Esme. Everything, he's a good man. He's providing. He's a good, why would you want to do that? But only you knew the insider reason as to why you couldn't give him that life, nor your children. And same with me. And now you're seeing sort of the fruits from your decision, I guess.
Yeah.
But not to say it's still not ever going to be a tragic outcome for the kids. That's why we're here talking about this today. We will both agree on the fact that if you can work this out for your children's sake, stay with your partner, let them live in a home with two parents. But there are reasons that some of us decide that it's just not fair on the kids to stay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think ultimately, when you do decide to leave or you choose to leave, you make that decision. I think, that the second layer to that is, how do we make this as easy as possible on the kids?
It's so true. And that's always the question to ask yourself above all when you're choosing to leave is, how am I going to make this as easy as I can on them? Because it's going to be hard. Every person I spoke to before I left, and I first started talking to people about it 6 years before I left. And a single mom told me, don't think the grass is green. And she used those words to me. She said, don't think you could do it. That's why I stayed another 6 years, actually. And I married him after that because I was contemplating it when they were really young. This person was one of those moms that kind of talked me out of it. And I worked at it for years and years after that for the kids' sake. That we did all we could kind of thing. But ultimately, it was still the decision I had to make. Yeah, so I have another question now to lead into the next is, what was your biggest fear of leaving? I guess a lot of it was just answered right now in what we talked about, but if you really want to think about that question, what was your biggest fear?
I think my biggest fear was being alone again. That might be a fear specific to me because, like I said, I grew up with a single mom and I started working at the age of 13. My entire life has been work, school, and then at a very young age, provide for my children, provide for my family. Even when I married, I think I took a year off and then I started to work right before we had our second child. So my biggest fear was I have to be independent, self-sufficient. I have to survive and thrive on my own,
I feel like when we talk about surviving and thriving, we talked about this earlier, right? That stage 1 is survival, stage 2 is thriving. If I can rhyme, let's say thrival. Survival and thrival.
You go through thrival after.
Yeah, we're in the thrival stage. But it's so true, right? At the beginning, you can't really thrive. You're in survival mode. And then it continues. We're all about survival. We're human beings, right? We're surviving every day in this crazy world we live in. But as a single mom, it was never really that designed. So we survive. Then we learn how to thrive and love our life as a single parent.
And 10 years is a long time.
It is.
10 years is a long time. We genuinely did become one with each other.
Right.
We had the same, we had the same hobbies. Obviously, we shared, the same home, the expenses, and, we lived life together for 10 years, together with our children. And to have to...
On that note, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Somebody once told me, I was in a divorce care group, which we will bring up support groups later in this podcast, but highly recommend them for some of you guys. Somebody told me that, especially if you're looking at it from a Christian standpoint or religious standpoint, what have you, it does say in the Bible, and it's just a known fact, that when you become with a spouse or a significant other, married or what have you, two become one. You literally become one. You have sex all the time. You become one soul. Two souls become one. And before you become one, you're two single individuals, right? And when you divorce or separate, you don't go back to being two individuals. You're torn apart. So you're never fully a whole person again. Or at least if you want to become a whole person again after that, it takes a very long time. But that is the difference between the before and the after. When you've been single, come together, and then when you separate, you're torn into two half people. And on that note, I just wanted to say that that's a very significant thing somebody told me, and that's why it is so painful to do it alone after you've become one with another person.
100%. Yeah, it's difficult for you as an individual, and then it's also difficult for that foundation that you've established for your children. You are breaking apart that foundation.
Yeah.
And I think that union. So obviously you do have to be aware of that does happen. And then, once you've decided to move on from that relationship, your job is to work on rebuilding that foundation again for yourself or for your children. And that's at the time where my mind was at. Okay, so I've decided to ask this person for the divorce. Now what? It helped that I, at the time, was speaking to a therapist, and what she said to me was, now you need to work on building your own foundation.
Yeah, because the kids only know one world, which is the foundation of family, of two parents and them. So you're right. It's a whole new normal, right? To those of you out there thinking about leaving, I'm going to ask you, Esme, what was your biggest regret?
That's such a big question, and it's such a good question, and it's actually really difficult to answer.
To pin down one, right?
It's really difficult to pin down one. It really is. I would say that when you're leaving a marriage, you're probably going to be left with a ton of regrets. You know?
That's true.
Yeah, you're going to reflect on your relationship.
Or
you know.
honestly, if I was to reword it from a regret, is like, if there's one thing you could tell somebody that you would have done differently at that stage, what would it be?
One thing that I think I would have done differently, though, and I have expressed this to you before as well, is, and I said it earlier in the podcast, that because of the lack of intimacy, I started dating right away. You know, right after my divorce, I started dating. That was extremely painful for my ex-husband. He was aware. He knew that I had moved on and moved forward, and that I was dating, and it was extremely painful for him. So I would say that maybe I would have been a little more considerate, because I did love him and respect him, and he is the father of my children. And I think we cannot forget that. You know, when we're going through divorce, you cannot forget that it is painful for you, and it's also painful for the partner. You know,
the other parent.
The other parent, when there's children involved.
Especially if your situation was different to mine. He was continuously helping you in the co-parenting right after the split. So you did have to consider his feelings. My situation was very different. He was out the picture right away. So I didn't have to consider that whatsoever. And I only had to consider my kids' feelings. For you, having to consider him knowing about it because he's very involved in their lives and your life, still raising the kids. Yeah, it's true.
And this is for both men and women.
Oh,
you know, if there's, you know, a couple listening to this that's going through divorce, or, you know, a man or a woman that's going through it now, I think what I would have done differently is I would have considered my ex-partner a little more. You have to respect each other and continue to understand that you still share, you know, a life together through your children.
So on that subject, to do that differently, how would you have done that? Would you have done it knowing that you had that big urge to date or what have you? Would you have just kept it more secretive? Or would you say I just wouldn't have dated at all? Because I feel like there's such a big urge when we first start getting single. Like, I'm sorry, but it's so, no matter what your intimacy situation was before you end, I think it's pretty typical that you have this extreme freedom sense of like, I'm free, I can finally date, and I'm not married. So we all do that. We all go out and date, whether it's just a date here and there, or we end up boinking someone really quickly. We shouldn't. At the end of the day, that stuff is so typical textbook sort of behavior, good or bad, it still happens. Knowing that that's such a draw for everybody, and that even though you'll tell everyone to be blue in the face, don't date, don't sleep with anyone, don't do any of that right away, people probably still will want to and still will. And knowing that, would you have done it differently and maybe kept it more secretive? I want to say secretive, but omitted more information? Or how would you have done that differently if you were still dead set on dating somebody, to keep that away from your ex that you were trying to preserve his feelings?
Yeah. So first of all, I wasn't boinking a ton of people.
No. I mean, but you were dating. But there's people out there that might, like me, that went straight into boinking. Okay? I didn't really date. I just did a boink here and there. So not good, not proud of it. But I'm just saying, whatever it might be that you choose to do with another individual, with your newfound freedom,
right?
How would you have preserved his feelings from that?
I think keeping it more secretive. And I think I'm using that as an example, but I think the bigger point is be respectful.
Right.
You know, whatever the situation is, whether you're dating someone else, whatever it might be that you're going through in that moment with your ex-spouse, be respectful of that spouse, you know?
Yeah.
And I think because I started dating right away and he did find out about it.
Question.
Yeah.
How did he find out about it?
Ooh, yeah. That's a whole nother,
I think this is relative to our whole podcast here.
No, absolutely. He was going through my phone records and my text messages and that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But
so it wasn't from your kids that he found out?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
No.
I didn't remember, but I thought maybe that had been how. And that's, if you guys are listening, a very common, I mean, if you've got babies, I highly doubt they're going to be telling on you, but yeah, sometimes it's the kids that rat you out.
But my first relationship, yes, the kids did rat me out. My first serious relationship, you know, and the first time that I introduced a man to my children, yes, it was through the kids that he had found out. So even that, maybe that's a conversation that I should have had with him first. Like, hey, I have a friend that I'm going to introduce. you know.
Very much.
And that's a great point, because it goes back to whatever your situation is, just be respectful of that partner, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that is one advice that I would give. That person's still going to be in your life forever if you share children. And if you don't share children, it's a little different, right? Because you both go your separate ways for the most part, and you move on.
It's interesting that will also be talked a lot about later in one of the episodes that we have on health